I think it's very true.
I definitely have, and I definitely do not think it's a myth. I think it definitely plays a prevalent role on society today.
I think if you're alone, you won't tend to make stupid decisions like how you would in a group, and that's why people in groups tend to get in more trouble than they would by themselves.
But I do remember a couple instances when I was much younger, like when I was in 7th grade, I went to Wildwood in New Jersey with a bunch of my friends, and we ended up staying up until I think 2 in the morning, going to random hotels and going into their pools and doing random things. And we ended up having to run for 20 minutes on the beach away from the cops to get back from our hotel. And it was a very poor decision, I wish I never made it, but because I was in such a large group with my friends, I ended up doing it anyway.
But yeah, back in the 8th grade, my friends and I were just riding our bikes around the hood. We ran up on this guy named Old Man Jenkins, and everyone was like, oh, let's ding-dong ditch him. So of course I was like, all right, I'll do it. We ding-dong ditched him, he ended up chasing us down. It was very scary, but we got away. It was just a dumb decision. Personally, I would try and give them my input on what's the right thing to do, but you're still more likely to go with whatever the group thinks because you're thinking maybe they're all right and I'm wrong.
I feel like to a certain extent, yes, but once the group makes a decision to the point where I know it's bad, I can tell myself when it gets to that point, and I know when to back away and when to go back to my place.
When we sent out a survey for other Bucknell students to fill out, we found that out of 55 people who responded, only 17 people had even heard of the myth. The other 38, or 68.5%, have never even heard of it. The next question we asked them was that, when they take part in group discussions, are they more likely to insist on their own opinion more as being correct, or would they listen and begin to agree with the opposing opinion? 21 people responded that they would stand up more for their own opinion, whereas 34 responded that they would listen to the opposing side and become more neutral on the topic. Lastly, we asked if they would agree or disagree that when they're in a large group, their decisions become more extreme to their own opinion, and 35 responded that they would disagree, meaning they would become more neutral in their opinions, and 20 responded that they would become more defensive in their own opinions. Although there were many students who had never heard of the myth, they seemed to believe it since the majority of them responded that they think groups usually come to more neutral opinions. Our myth is that large groups make less extreme decisions than individuals. Initial studies have shown that this myth is true due to the results of group interaction, which led to a leveling of attitudes in normal judgment situations. On the other hand, there has been much more research proving the theory of group polarization and the risky shift. Group polarization in social psychology has to do with the tendency of individuals who have an initial opinion about some topic, and then when they take part in group discussion, they tend to make more extreme decisions or have more extreme beliefs that agree with their original opinions. This means that people usually make more extreme decisions after group discussion than what would have been decided if the problem were approached by just the individual. For example, if there was a discussion about racism, the people who are racist are more likely to defend racism even more after a group discussion between other individuals who are also racist than they would have had before discussing the issue in a group of other people who are also racist. The risky shift goes hand in hand with the group polarization, in which it defines the tendency of groups to make much riskier decisions than they would when they are on their own. When people are in groups, they make decisions about risk differently from when they are alone. In the group, they are likely to make riskier decisions as the shared risk makes the individual risk less. We can see examples of the risky shift with more extreme actions due to a group setting and of group polarization of stronger opinions after group discussion in the media today. Some examples are flash mobs, riots, and jury decision.
Them with flashbang grenades and pepper spray.
You can't touch this.
All right, Mr. Simpson, would you please stand and face the jury?
In violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as we, the jury, in the above entitled action, further find the special circumstance that the defendant, Orthal James Simpson, has in this case been convicted of at least one crime of murder of the first degree and one or more crimes of murder of the first or second degree to be not true.
David Myers ran an experiment which was based on attitudes towards women. Participants in the study, 67 females and 28 males, were asked questions to measure their attitudes having to do with the role of women. Each of the 48 statements regarding the role of women was responded to on a 7-point scale, from -3 strongly disagreeing to +3 strongly agreeing. These responses were recorded as a feminism score, and the subjects were then divided into chauvinists and feminists, and then broken into groups of 4 or 5 within their respective groups. Each group had to discuss 6 statements that were created to stimulate group discussion about the initial responses. They were then retested on their attitude measures. The control and experimental groups received the exact same treatments, except there were differences in the discussion content. The chauvinist population was more conservative in their initial responses to statements than the feminist population. The table shows that the attitude gap did increase. This polarization was due to increased liberalism on the part of the already liberal feminists, whereas the chauvinists stayed constant. This shows further support for the generalization that talking in groups tends to enhance the mean initial attitude tendency. Another study was done by Moscovici and Zavaloni, who wanted to find out how group polarization could be explained, as well as under what conditions does polarization occur. They conducted a study where there were 3 separate experiments carried out on a group of 140 male students between the ages 18 and 19. The independent variables were the different topics selected for each experiment. The first 2 experiments addressing topics that would result in polarization of opinions based on attitude of General de Gaulle and the Americans. These tests included positive, negative, and ambiguous questions. The dependent variables were how the responses would differ based on being an individual or being in a large group environment. The results for the attitude test were measured by a 7-category scale in which -3 was strongly disagree, 0 was a neutral point, and +3 was strongly agreeing. The third experiment was based on judgment results. They were asked about objective judgments and were asked how to share their favor or unfavored opinions towards de Gaulle, whether or not they agreed or disagreed. Each individual's score was computed and represented a subject's overall attitude towards de Gaulle or towards the Americans. Then, a score was computed to figure out the group attitudes by using consensus ratings. The mean of the individual scale scores were somewhat favorable to General de Gaulle, 0.9, and somewhat unfavorable to the Americans, -0.6. The group consensus scores for General de Gaulle were even more favorable at 1.18 and even more unfavorable for the Americans at -1.09. From the results and looking at the table, they found that the consensus was more distant from the neutral point of the scale than was the pre-consensus mean in all of the experimental conditions. These results were very significant and suggested that opinions do in fact become more extreme, as well as judgments become more polarized as a result of group discussion. They also concluded that the opinions and judgments shown by the group discussions will be the same as the individual's personal opinions. Lastly, they found that the polarization effect on both opinions and judgments when dealing with group discussion is more extreme when the difference between the initial opinions and judgments of individuals in the group is larger. In the last study, Kogan and Wallach ran an experiment that would further investigate the effects of group interaction on risk and conservatism in decision-making. In this study, a total of 167 college students participated, making up 14 all-male groups and 14 all-female groups. Each group began by filling out a questionnaire individually. This survey consisted of 12 situational questions, each designed to have one conservative outcome and one riskier outcome. Once each individual completed the 12 hypothetical situations, they combined as a group to discuss their choices and were told to come up with a unanimous decision for each situation. Once the discussions were over, each participant had to refill the survey individually, these results being the post-discussion answers. The results in Table 1 and 2 demonstrate the significance of the conservative difference between the mean of the pre-discussion individual decisions and the group's consensual decisions. A negative difference indicated a shift in the riskier direction. There were only 2 items that showed no greater risk effect. Both tables demonstrated a stronger move towards a greater risk when the groups made unanimous decisions. Tables 3 and 4 demonstrate the significance of the differences between the individual mean pre-discussion decisions versus the individual mean post-discussion decisions. All negative values demonstrate a shift towards the riskier outcome. This goes to prove that the risky shift exists within group decision, in which individuals rely on other people's opinions in order to justify the much more risky decision, which will leave them less responsible if the outcome is not what they hope for. Oftentimes, when we think of group decision-making, we think of group environments such as in the office or when it comes to making rational decisions. Under these circumstances, it makes sense for group discussion to lead to neutral opinions, since you are forced to take everyone's ideas into consideration and try to please them all. We usually don't consider how our opinions become more extreme when we are surrounded by other people who feel the same way, if not stronger. We underestimate the way that their strong opinions oftentimes make ours stronger after discussing the issue as a group. In conclusion, we can say that under group circumstances, it is easier to form polarized opinions which can lead to an outcome that is much riskier than an outcome that would have come from just an individual. With encouragement from other people who have the same beliefs as you, it is easy to play the riskier move because you don't feel like it would be all your fault if it was unsuccessful.